Imagine living in a time when the simple act of carrying a book, sharing an idea, or even whispering a thought could lead to imprisonment, torture, or worse. Throughout the medieval period, knowledge was not just power, it was a threat. Those who possessed it, from monks preserving ancient texts to scholars challenging established beliefs, often found themselves hunted, their very lives hanging in the balance. In the shadows of this dangerous world, an extraordinary system of communication evolved, one that required no words, left no traces, and saved countless lives. This is the story of the silent signals used by knowledge carriers, a hidden language of survival that allowed wisdom to endure against impossible odds. Picture a scholar on a lonely road, his cloak folded just so to warn approaching allies of danger nearby. Envision a monk in a candlelit scriptorium, subtly adjusting the flame to signal that their work must remain hidden. These were not random acts, they were deliberate, carefully crafted gestures born from necessity and refined through secrecy. Over time, an entire vocabulary of silent signals emerged, blending seamlessly into everyday life. From the way a book was held to the arrangement of plants in a monastery garden, these carriers turned the ordinary into the extraordinary, ensuring that knowledge could be shared, preserved, and protected without ever drawing suspicion. In this video, we will uncover 21 of these ingenious silent signals, each one a testament to human creativity and resilience. You'll discover how something as simple as a folded handkerchief or the tap of a walking stick could convey urgent messages, coordinate escapes, and safeguard entire networks of thinkers and innovators. But this isn't just a journey into the past, it's an exploration of how these age-old tactics still resonate today, in an era where information is both currency and vulnerability. By understanding how knowledge survived against all odds, we can learn timeless lessons about discretion, trust, and the power of subtle communication. So settle in and prepare to step into a world where silence spoke volumes, and where the quietest gestures often held the loudest meaning. To truly grasp why these silent signals were so vital, we must first step back into the world that made them necessary. The medieval period was not a time of open inquiry or free exchange of ideas. Knowledge was a tightly controlled commodity, often viewed with deep suspicion by those in power. Both the church and the state understood that ideas could challenge their authority, ignite dissent, and unravel the very fabric of the social order. This led to an environment where possessing the wrong book or expressing the wrong thought could have dire consequences. Authorities like the Inquisition were not merely religious tribunals. They were powerful instruments of control, designed to root out heresy and suppress any intellectual currents that threatened the status quo. Their methods were thorough and often brutal, employing networks of informants and public trials to create a culture of fear that discouraged independent thought. In this atmosphere of intense scrutiny, the carriers of knowledge, those dedicated monks, scholars, and philosophers, found themselves walking a perilous tightrope. They were often the sole guardians of texts that contained revolutionary ideas, from early scientific theories that contradicted religious doctrine to translations of ancient works that offered different ways of understanding the world. A traveling scholar with a satchel of manuscripts was not just a pedestrian, he was a potential target carrying contraband that could see him imprisoned. Monasteries, while centers of learning, were not always safe havens. They could be raided, their libraries purged of any material deemed dangerous or unorthodox. This constant pressure forced these brave individuals to innovate, to find ways to communicate and collaborate without ever speaking a word that could be overheard or writing a message that could be intercepted. It was from this crucible of danger that secret networks began to emerge. Groups like the Cathars in southern France or the early humanists scattered across Europe operated in the shadows, bound together by a shared commitment to preserving and advancing knowledge. Their survival depended on absolute discretion and an unwavering trust in one another. They needed a system of communication that was invisible to outsiders yet instantly recognizable to initiates. These signals had to be woven into the fabric of daily life, disguised as mundane actions and ordinary objects. A gesture as simple as adjusting one's cloak or placing a book on a table in a certain way became a sophisticated language of survival. This historical context is not just a backdrop, it is the very reason these silent signals were invented. They were the ingenious response of the human spirit to oppression, a testament to the relentless drive to ensure that knowledge, once gained, would never be lost. At the heart of these ingenious survival tactics lay a sophisticated set of principles, a kind of unwritten rulebook for silent communication. The very first and most crucial principle was subtlety. Every signal had to be woven so seamlessly into the fabric of ordinary life that it became invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. A gesture couldn't be a grand, theatrical sweep of the arm. It had to be a slight adjustment of a hood, a barely perceptible pause while turning a page, or a seemingly casual tap of a walking stick against a cobblestone. The goal was to create a message that an observer would dismiss as meaningless background noise, while an ally would recognize it as a critical piece of information. This required an incredible amount of discipline and practice, as the carriers had to perform these actions with a natural ease, burying their true intent beneath layers of mundane behavior. Closely tied to subtlety was the principle of ambiguity. The most effective signals were those that could be explained away with a perfectly reasonable, innocent excuse if questioned. This concept of plausible deniability was their primary shield. If an authority figure demanded to know why a monk was counting his rosary beads in an unusual pattern, he could simply claim to be a devout but perhaps slightly forgetful man of God, revisiting a prayer. A baker accused of using flour to draw strange symbols could point to the messy, unpredictable nature of his trade. The signals were designed to live in a gray area, their true meaning known only to those who had been initiated into the code. This ambiguity protected not just the individual making the signal, but the entire network, as a captured carrier could not be forced to reveal a secret they could credibly claim did not exist. Finally, these methods were deeply rooted in cultural and occupational nuance. The carriers didn't invent a completely new language from scratch. They cleverly repurposed the symbols and actions already present in their daily environments. A scribe would use the tools of his trade, like ink stains or quill choices, to send messages. A farmer might use the arrangement of hay bales in a field. A pilgrim would use the well-understood iconography of religious badges. By building their secret code upon a foundation of shared public understanding, they made it incredibly resilient. An inquisitor from a city might not recognize the significance of a specific way a shepherd stacked stones on a hillside, because that signal was drawn from the local, rural culture. This localization made the signals incredibly difficult for an outside authority to crack, as they required an intimate knowledge of the very communities those authorities often struggled to fully control. This entire system, built on subtlety, ambiguity, and cultural nuance, transformed everyday life into a continuous, silent conversation, ensuring that the flame of knowledge could be passed carefully from one hand to another without ever being snuffed out. Now, let's explore the first and perhaps most elegant of these silent signals, the language of the cloak. In an age where nearly every traveler, scholar, and merchant wore a cloak for protection against the elements, this ubiquitous garment became a perfect canvas for covert messaging. The system was beautifully simple yet required meticulous precision. A knowledge carrier wouldn't just throw their cloak on, they would drape it with intention. A common code might involve the shoulder. For instance, folding the cloak tightly over the right shoulder could silently scream a warning. You are being watched, do not approach me. Conversely, allowing the cloak to hang open and loose from both shoulders might broadcast an all-clear signal to a watching ally, indicating that it was safe to converse or exchange materials. The genius of this method lay in its deniability and its speed. Imagine a scholar walking through a crowded market square, a satchel of forbidden texts heavy at his side. He spots a known informant lurking near the city gates. In a single, fluid motion, he can grasp his cloak and pull it snugly across his chest, a gesture that to any casual observer simply looks like a man adjusting to a sudden chill in the air. But to a fellow member of his network across the street, that slight tightening of fabric is a glaring red flag, a silent command to abort their planned meeting and disappear into the crowd. There was no need for frantic hand signals or risky whispers. The message was sent and received in plain sight, its true meaning hidden behind a veil of complete normality. Historical records, particularly from travelogues and Inquisition interrogation transcripts, provide fascinating glimpses into this practice. We read of travelers being instructed on the proper way to wear their cloaks when journeying through certain territories, a clear allusion to this signaling system. One account describes a group of scholars evading capture at a checkpoint because the man at the front of their party had his cloak folded over his left arm, a prearranged signal that prompted those behind him to subtly change their route and avoid the danger altogether. This simple piece of clothing, so ordinary and unremarkable, was transformed into a dynamic tool for survival, proving that sometimes the most powerful messages are not spoken, but worn. While the cloak offered a dynamic signal for the traveler on the move, another powerful tool existed for those whose world revolved around the written word. In the hushed silence of libraries and scriptoriums, a different kind of language emerged, one hidden within the pages of books themselves. Consider the immense value of a single volume in the Middle Ages. It was a treasure, often painstakingly copied by hand over months or even years. Because books were such prominent and respected objects, they became the perfect hiding place for secrets. A scholar carrying a tome was a common sight, one that rarely aroused suspicion. This very normality is what made the humble bookmark such an ingenious signaling device. The system was deceptively simple yet could be incredibly complex. At its most basic level, the page number where a bookmark was placed could convey a prearranged message. For a group of scholars, perhaps marking page 47 meant a meeting was set for the 7th hour using a simple numerical code. But the sophistication didn't end there. The angle of the bookmark protruding from the top of the book could indicate urgency. A bookmark tilted sharply to the left might signal immediate danger, while one perfectly straight could mean all was well. Some networks even used different types of bookmarks. A strip of plain leather versus a woven silk cord could indicate whether the carrier was a messenger or a recipient, streamlining the process of identifying allies in a crowded monastery courtyard. This practice evolved into even more elaborate codes that integrated the text itself. A bookmark placed not just on a page, but next to a specific word or passage, could give that signal an additional layer of meaning. For instance, a marker placed beside the word light in a philosophical text might point to a safe house known as the Lantern. Marginalia, those notes scribbled in the margins, could also be part of the cipher. A seemingly innocent doodle or a particular underline pattern could act as a key, telling the initiated reader how to interpret the bookmark's position. This transformed the entire book from a mere container of knowledge into an active participant in its protection, a map and a messaging system bound in leather and vellum. The sheer beauty of this method was its flawless deniability. If challenged, a knowledge carrier could simply claim they had stopped reading at that page, or that the crooked placement was a mere accident. There was nothing to confiscate, no incriminating separate note to discover. The message existed only in the shared understanding of the group and vanished the moment the bookmark was moved. It was a testament to the fact that in a world where literacy was a powerful and sometimes dangerous skill, the ability to read between the lines quite literally could mean the difference between preserving a revolutionary idea and having it be lost to history forever. Moving from the quiet language of books to the bustling energy of public spaces, we find another everyday object repurposed for secrecy, the handkerchief. In an era long before disposable tissues, a cloth handkerchief was a personal and practical item carried by nearly everyone, from the nobility to the common merchant. This universal presence made it the perfect tool for a silent code. Knowledge carriers transformed these simple squares of linen or silk into a sophisticated system of identification and warning, turning a gesture of personal hygiene into one of profound interpersonal trust. A network could establish a specific set of rules, a particular way of folding, a certain color displayed, or a distinctive knot tied that would be invisible to the untrained eye, but as clear as a shouted warning to an ally. The versatility of the handkerchief code was its greatest strength. A carrier could use it in a dozen different ways depending on the situation. Tying a blue handkerchief loosely around the wrist might signal, "I am a friend, approach if safe." Alternatively, if that same blue cloth was knotted tightly and tucked into a belt, it could mean, "I am being watched, do not acknowledge me." The placement was everything. A white handkerchief casually draped over the strap of a travel satchel could indicate that the bag contained sensitive manuscripts, silently telling a lookout that this traveler was part of the network and needed to be guided to safety. In the crowded, chaotic atmosphere of a medieval market or a large religious festival, these subtle signals were indispensable. They allowed for real-time communication across a busy square without a single word exchanged, a nod, or any gesture that might be intercepted by an informant. Historical evidence from guild records and merchant ledgers offers us tantalizing clues about this practice. We find mentions of specific linen patterns or colors being associated with certain trades that were known to harbor free-thinking individuals. There are accounts of travelers being instructed to seek out innkeepers who kept a particular colored handkerchief hanging from a hook behind the bar, a silent advertisement that the establishment was a safe house for those carrying contraband knowledge. This system was built on a foundation of meticulous planning and absolute memorization. There was no room for error. A mistaken fold or a misplaced knot could lead to catastrophe, making the humble handkerchief a powerful symbol of the immense responsibility and quiet courage these knowledge carriers held in their hands every single day. While the handkerchief allowed for visual signals in crowded spaces, knowledge carriers traveling through the darkness or in echoing stone corridors needed a method that relied on sound, but a sound that could be easily dismissed. This is where the simple walking stick, an essential companion for any medieval traveler, revealed its hidden potential. Far more than just a support for weary legs, it became a versatile instrument for rhythmic communication, a kind of Morse code long before its invention. Groups of scholars or messengers would develop precise tap sequences, each pattern a distinct command understood only by those within their trusted circle. Two sharp, rapid taps against a tree trunk might mean halt immediately, while a slower, deliberate tap, pause, tap could signal proceed with caution. The beauty of this system was its adaptability and its camouflage. In the natural soundscape of a forest or the vast, resonant hall of a monastery, the noise of a stick hitting stone or wood was utterly unremarkable. This technique required not just memorization but impeccable timing and situational awareness. A carrier had to judge the acoustics of their environment to ensure their message was heard by allies but masked from potential eavesdroppers. On a quiet forest path, a light tap might suffice, while in a noisy market street, a firmer strike would be necessary. The context of the movement itself was also part of the code. A sequence tapped out while walking might have a different meaning than the same sequence delivered while the group was stationary, adding another layer of complexity and security. This allowed for remarkably sophisticated coordination. A scout walking ahead could warn the entire party of an upcoming patrol simply by altering the rhythm of their steps with their staff, enabling those behind to melt into the shadows or change their route without a single whispered word. Historical accounts from pilgrimage chronicles and even some monastic rule books hint at the effectiveness of this method. There are stories of groups transporting forbidden texts through heavily guarded mountain passes, their scouts using a series of coded taps to guide the main party through safe routes under the cover of fog and darkness. In one particularly vivid anecdote, a group of scholars hiding in the catacombs beneath a city used the tap of a walking stick on the ancient Roman pipes running through the walls to communicate between chambers, coordinating their movements to avoid the guards searching for them above. The walking stick, an object of pure utility, was thus transformed into a lifeline, a tool that could literally feel out the path ahead and tap out a warning, ensuring that the precious knowledge it helped carry would survive to see another day. Now let us step from the rhythmic world of sound into the realm of flickering light and shadow. In the medieval period, the cover of darkness was both a shield and a challenge. When the sun set, the primary source of illumination for scholars and monks huddled over their work was the humble candle. Its warm, dancing flame was a beacon of productivity, but in the hands of a knowledge carrier, it became something far more, a silent telegraph system. In the vast, echoing halls of a monastery or the cramped secrecy of an underground scriptorium, the ability to communicate across a room without a whisper was priceless. The manipulation of a candle's flame offered a perfect, deniable solution, turning a simple act of adjusting one's light into a sophisticated language of warning and reassurance. The techniques were as varied as they were clever. A scribe feeling the chill of a draft might cup his hand around the flame, not to warm his fingers, but to momentarily dim the light in a specific, recognizable pattern, a silent signal to his counterpart across the room that a supervisor was approaching. The most dramatic method involved the complete extinguishing and relighting of the candle. A prearranged code might dictate that 2 quick snuffs followed by a relight meant continue working, while 3 rapid extinguishments in succession was a dire alarm, indicating that the meeting was compromised and materials needed to be hidden immediately. The beauty of this was its speed and finality. The message was sent in a heartbeat, and the evidence vanished into a wisp of smoke. By the time an inquisitive guard or abbot entered the room, everyone would be engrossed in their work, the only sound the quiet scratch of quills, the only smell the faint scent of tallow, with no trace of the silent warning that had just flashed through the air. This practice finds its voice in monastic chronicles and personal diaries from the era. We read of nighttime copying sessions for texts deemed too controversial for daylight hours, where a single monk was stationed as a lookout. His only tool was his candle, His duty was not to call out, but to carefully watch the door and, at the first sign of trouble, enact the prearranged signal. The instant his flame died and was reborn in the urgent pattern for danger, a dozen other candles would be similarly snuffed out. Forbidden manuscripts would be slipped into hidden compartments within desks or under floorboards, and the monks would scatter to their beds or assume positions of prayer, the room plunging into an innocent, sleepy darkness. The candle, therefore, was more than just a tool for seeing. It was a guardian of secrets. Its light allowed the work to continue, and its deliberate manipulation protected that work, ensuring that the dangerous knowledge being preserved could never be caught in the act. In an age defined by profound faith, few objects were more personal or universally recognized than the rosary. For the medieval knowledge carrier, this string of beads was far more than a devotional aid. It was a perfect shield for a secret language. The rhythmic, repetitive motion of moving from one bead to the next during prayer was so commonplace that it became virtually invisible, a perfect cover for a silent, sophisticated signaling system. The method relied on subverting the expected pattern. While a devout believer would follow a set sequence of prayers for each bead, a member of a secret network would use a completely different code. A pause lasting a few heartbeats too long on the seventh bead could indicate the number of armed guards at a city gate. Intentionally skipping over the third and fourth beads might be a prearranged signal of immediate danger, a silent scream for help disguised as a fumbling, distracted prayer. The genius of this system was its flawless built-in alibi. If ever challenged by an authority figure, the carrier could simply bow their head and claim a moment of spiritual weakness, a wandering mind, a forgotten prayer, or a particularly fervent moment of contemplation that required extra focus. The very act they were accused of was the very thing that protected them. This plausible deniability was a lifeline, as evidenced by transcripts from Inquisition trials. In one remarkable case, a group of scholars accused of heresy were observed frequently handling their rosaries in a similar, unusual manner during their imprisonment. When interrogated, each man independently gave the same innocent explanation. They were seeking comfort and strength from prayer during their ordeal. The inquisitors, unable to prove otherwise, were forced to accept this explanation, never realizing they were witnessing a coordinated, silent conversation happening right under their noses. This practice required immense discipline and focus. A carrier had to maintain a facade of serene devotion while their mind was racing, counting beads and recalling complex codes under the pressure of potential discovery. The rosary became a tactile map, a calendar, and a messaging device all in one. The feel of a specific wooden bead under the thumb could signify a safe house location, while the smoothness of a polished stone bead might confirm the identity of a trusted contact. It was a profound merging of the spiritual and the practical, using the instruments of faith to protect the very knowledge that some authorities deemed a threat to that faith. In the silent movement of beads through anxious fingers, the preservation of ideas became its own form of prayer, while the rhythmic tap of a walking stick or the coded placement of a bookmark were signals for those on the move or in close quarters. Another system operated on a much larger scale, using the very buildings of a medieval town or city as its medium. In an environment where every stranger's glance could be a threat, the ability to assess a location's safety from a distance was invaluable. This is where the architecture itself began to speak. Window shutters, a common feature on homes and shops, became a powerful and public bulletin board for those who knew how to read it. The adjustment of a shutter, a task so mundane it was practically invisible, could silently shout a warning or extend an invitation across a crowded street. The language of shutters was one of angles and alignment, a visual code that required no special tools or materials. A safe house might have a very specific signal, such as the left shutter being opened to a perfect 45-degree angle while the right remained closed. To a knowledge carrier approaching down the muddy thoroughfare, that precise angle was a beacon of safety, indicating that the coast was clear and they could enter without fear. Conversely, if both shutters were slammed completely shut in the middle of the day, it might be a universal sign of danger, a silent scream that the house was under watch or had been compromised. Some networks used more complex signals. Perhaps a shutter left slightly ajar on the upper floor indicated that a meeting was in progress downstairs, while a perfectly symmetrical alignment of all shutters meant the resident was away and the house should not be used. This method was particularly brilliant because it leveraged the public nature of private property. A scout could simply walk through a district, his eyes scanning the facades of buildings, and compile a complete report on the state of the network without ever speaking to a soul or setting foot inside. He could see which safe houses were active, which were under duress, and which were available, all from the opposite side of the town square. This allowed for incredibly efficient and safe coordination, especially during times of heightened tension like raids or inquisitions. A lookout posted in a church bell tower could watch for the approach of authorities and, by quickly altering the shutters on his own home, trigger a chain reaction of silent warnings that would ripple through the entire neighborhood faster than any runner could hope to deliver the message. Urban histories and records from municipal councils occasionally provide us with glimpses of this practice, often from the perspective of the confused authorities trying to stamp it out. There are accounts from French towns during the Albigensian crusade against the Cathars, where officials noted with frustration that suspected heretics seemed to vanish into thin air just before a planned raid, as if the very buildings had whispered a warning. In one particularly telling case, a landlord was brought before a magistrate for repeatedly, and in his words, accidentally breaking the shutters on his windows, making them impossible to close fully. The authorities suspected this was a deliberate attempt to maintain a perpetual, all-clear signal, and while they could never prove it, the anecdote speaks volumes about the quiet war of information being waged in the streets. The window shutter, a simple piece of functional architecture, was thus transformed into a critical node in a vast, silent communication network, proving that sometimes the safest secrets are those hidden in the most open and ordinary of places. Transitioning from the architectural signals of window shutters, we find a system of communication that was literally in everyone's pocket. In the bustling marketplaces and crowded taverns of the medieval world, few things were more common than the clink of coinage. Money changed hands constantly, a universal language of commerce that provided the perfect cover for a far more secretive dialogue. The coin flip or its deliberate placement on a counter wasn't just a game of chance or a simple transaction. For a knowledge carrier, it was a meticulously choreographed performance, a silent signal broadcast in the most public of arenas. The beauty of this method was its effortless camouflage. Imagine a scholar waiting at a busy inn, a satchel of delicate manuscripts at his feet. A stranger approaches the bar, orders an ale, and pays for it. As the innkeeper turns to fetch the drink, the man casually flips a single coin, catches it, and slaps it onto the wooden counter. To anyone else, it's a moment of impatience or idle habit. But our scholar sees it. He notices the specific way the coin was spun, the particular hand that caught it, and most importantly, which side is facing up. Heads means the contact is legitimate and the meeting is secure. Tails is a silent alarm, a warning that the stranger feels watched or that the location is no longer safe. In that split second, a critical decision is made without a single word or glance of acknowledgement, all under the noses of potential informants. This system extended far beyond a simple flip. The arrangement of coins left on a table could convey complex messages. Two coins placed side by side might indicate that two people should meet, while a coin placed deliberately on top of another could signal that one party was being followed. Some networks developed even more sophisticated techniques, such as engraving tiny, nearly invisible marks on the edge of certain coins. A carrier could discreetly show the marked coin to a potential ally while ostensibly checking the date or quality of the metal. If the other person recognized the mark, trust was instantly established. If not, the carrier could simply pocket the coin and move on, the interaction appearing as nothing more than a merchant examining his currency. This turned every coin purse into a potential directory of trusted contacts, a hidden network carried in plain sight. Medieval merchant guild records and court documents from trade disputes occasionally let slip fascinating evidence of this practice. We read of specific coin types or mint years being cited in seemingly unrelated contexts, often in the notes of merchants known to sympathize with suppressed philosophical movements. In one trial, an accused heretic was found with a collection of otherwise ordinary pennies, all filed with a small notch on the king's crown. When questioned, he claimed it was to track a debt, but the authorities suspected it was a method of identifying fellow travelers. The coin, an object of pure economic value, was thus imbued with a far greater worth. It became a key to safety, a token of trust, and a silent, spendable signal that could be passed from hand to hand, ensuring the real currency of ideas continued to circulate freely. Moving from the monetary signals of coins, we arrive at another item of personal adornment that spoke volumes without uttering a single word: the glove. In the stratified society of the Middle Ages, gloves were far more than mere hand coverings. They were powerful symbols of status, profession, and even moral character. A knight received his gloves at his dubbing, a bishop wore them during sacred rites, and a lady's delicate gloves signified her refinement and wealth. This deeply ingrained social language of gloves made them a perfect medium for a secondary, covert dialogue. Knowledge carriers, often moving in these very same aristocratic or guild circles, could adopt and subvert these established norms to create a silent identification system that was hiding in the most elegant of plain sights. The system's sophistication lay in its details, each one a potential letter in a silent alphabet. Color was the most immediate signal. While a vibrant pair of red gloves might simply denote a noblewoman to the general public within a specific network, that same red could be a blazing warning to avoid contact, indicating the wearer believed they were under surveillance. Conversely, a humble pair of undyed tan leather gloves, common among craftsmen, could be the ultimate signal of safety, a beacon to allies that the wearer was approachable and unobserved. But the code went far deeper than mere color. The style and manner of wear were equally telling. A glove worn on the left hand only might identify the carrier as a messenger, while a glove tucked neatly into the right side belt could signal that the individual was a recipient waiting for a drop-off. Perhaps the most ingenious signals were the most subtle ones, those that played on the concept of intentional imperfection. In a society where sartorial presentation was closely tied to honor and reputation, a flaw was noticeable. A knowledge carrier might deliberately wear a glove with the tip of the index finger cut off, a seemingly careless act that to an ally meant, "Follow me at a distance." Or they might pair two gloves that were slightly mismatched in color or style, a fashion faux pas that would be quietly noted by those in the know as a sign that a prearranged meeting location had been compromised and an alternate site was in effect. These signals were brilliantly deniable. If questioned, the carrier could simply blame a poor tailor, a lost glove, or their own personal eccentricity. Historical texts, particularly those detailing sumptuary laws that dictated who could wear what, offer us fascinating clues about this practice. these laws were obsessed with controlling the messages sent by clothing, fiercely regulating the colors and materials available to different social classes. This very obsession reveals how potent fashion was as a language. It is not a great leap to imagine that secret networks would co-opt this same language for their own purposes. Guild records sometimes mention unusual orders for gloves in specific quantities or colors that don't align with a member's typical trade, hinting at bulk purchases for a group rather than an individual. In the crowded, colorful court of a duke or the bustling hall of a merchant guild, a quick glance at a person's hands could therefore convey a wealth of information not about their social rank, but about the safety of the moment and the secrets they might be carrying right in their palm. For the medieval messenger or scholar, the horse was far more than a simple means of transportation. It was a partner in survival, a trusted companion on perilous roads where every stranger could be a threat and every bend in the path could conceal an ambush. And just as the rider learned to read the landscape for danger, so too did they learn to speak through their steeds' very equipment. The horse's harness, a complex network of leather straps, metal buckles, and functional ornaments, became a dynamic and silent billboard, a way to send urgent messages to fellow travelers without ever breaking stride or drawing the suspicion of anyone who might be watching from the shadows. The language of the harness was one of deliberate imperfection and subtle alteration. In a world where a well-kept horse was a sign of status and competence, any noticeable flaw in its tack would be immediately apparent to a trained ally. A messenger riding with a deliberately loose cheek strap on the bridle, for instance, might be signaling to the scout behind him that he suspected a tail, a silent warning to fall back and prepare for potential trouble. Conversely, a specific decorative knot tied into the reins near the bit could be a positive signal, perhaps indicating that the next waypoint was secure and that the group should proceed at pace. The adjustments were small, often requiring a keen eye to spot from a distance, but for those initiated into the code, they were as clear as a shouted command. This allowed a single rider at the front of a column to communicate vital information about the road ahead back to the entire party, enabling real-time coordination that was both instantaneous and utterly deniable. This method was particularly vital when approaching the most dangerous points on any journey, official checkpoints, toll bridges, or the gates of a walled city. Here, stopping to converse was impossible, and any furtive whispering would be immediately suspect. A knowledge carrier transporting forbidden texts couldn't risk a verbal exchange with the guards. But they could, while dismounting or presenting their papers, make a final, crucial adjustment to their gear. Perhaps they would quickly loosen the girth strap of their saddle an extra notch, a signal to any allied travelers in the queue behind them that the guards were conducting thorough searches and that they should turn back if possible. Or maybe they would shift a specific ornament, like a talisman hanging from the bridle, from the left side to the right, indicating that the guards were accepting bribes. These tiny actions, performed under the guise of checking on the welfare of their animal, provided a critical lifeline of information that could save an entire network from capture. Medieval travelogues and the personal accounts of itinerant monks are filled with fleeting references to this practice, often praising the intelligence of a particularly perceptive horse when, in reality, they were hinting at the cunning of its rider. One chronicle describes a group of scholars fleeing persecution, their scout riding a mile ahead. By simply adjusting the lay of a saddlebag flap, he was able to warn the main party of a fallen tree blocking the road, a potential ambush site, allowing them to divert into the woods and avoid a trap set by their pursuers. In another account, a messenger facing a fork in the road wasn't sure which path was safe. He paused, pretending to tend to his horse, and subtly retied a strap in a prearranged question pattern. A few moments later, a shepherd on a distant hillside who was part of the same network began moving his flock in a specific direction, silently pointing the way to safety. The horse and its harness thus became the central link in a vast, silent chain of communication, proving that on the open road, sometimes the most important conversations were held not between people, but through the silent language of leather and trust. Within the hallowed silence of the scriptorium, where the only sounds were the gentle scrape of the quill and the soft rustle of vellum, another layer of silent conversation was taking place. To the untrained eye, the manuscripts produced here were works of devout art, flawless in their execution. But for those initiated into the secrets of the scribble arts, the page held a deeper, more dangerous dialogue, spoken not with words but with intentional mistakes. The deliberate placement of an ink stain, a seemingly accidental blot or smudge, became one of the most sophisticated and deniable signaling systems of all. In a world where every word was subject to scrutiny, the humble ink stain offered a way to annotate the truth right under the censor's nose. The system was brilliantly subtle, playing on the expectations of the observer. A medieval manuscript inspector, often a cleric or official looking for heresy or sedition, would be focused on the text itself. He would scan for banned phrases, heretical ideas, or challenges to authority. A small, dark blotch of ink in the margin, that was merely a sign of a scribe's human fallibility, a minor imperfection in an otherwise perfect devotional object. It was beneath notice, and that was its greatest strength, but for the intended reader, another member of the secret network, that exact same stain was a glaring beacon. Its location was everything. A blot carefully placed at the top corner of a page might indicate that the entire folio had been reviewed and approved by authorities, its content now considered safe but potentially sanitized. A stain directly beside a particular passage, however, could be a dire warning. This statement is false, or the true meaning of this is found elsewhere. Some of the most fascinating examples come from surviving medical and scientific texts. A recipe for a potent remedy might be followed by a large, deliberate ink splash, not as an error, but as a signal that the measurements had been deliberately altered to render the potion harmless, a way to prevent powerful knowledge from falling into the wrong hands while still preserving the formula for those who knew how to read the warning. In philosophical texts, a series of tiny, almost imperceptible dots placed next to certain arguments could indicate which lines of reasoning were considered the most dangerously radical and therefore the most vital to protect. The scribes, in their role as guardians, were not just copyists, they were active curators of truth, using their tools to separate fact from approved fiction and to guide the discerning reader through a landscape of potential deception. This practice required immense courage and skill. The scribe had to create a flaw that was convincing enough to be dismissed as an accident, yet precise enough to carry a specific meaning. They were walking a razor's edge, potentially defacing an incredibly valuable and sacred object to serve a higher purpose of preservation. Evidence of this can be found in the analysis of certain manuscripts where the chemical composition of the accidental stain matches the ink in the scribe's pot exactly, suggesting it was applied at the time of writing and not in some later moment of carelessness. Other manuscripts show stains that have been gently blotted, not wiped, indicating a desire to control the spill's size and location, to make it just right. In the quiet dedication of these scribes, we see the ultimate expression of the knowledge carrier's creed, that the truth was worth any risk, and that sometimes the most honest thing on a page was not the perfectly penned text, but the perfectly placed flaw that whispered its warning beside it. Now let us turn our ears to the soundscape of the medieval world, where few things were more constant or commanding than the ringing of bells. They governed daily life from monastery to village, marking the hours for prayer, for work, for meals, and for rest. This omnipresent auditory backdrop provided an ingenious cover for a clandestine communications network. Within religious communities, the bell ringer often held a role far more significant than that of a simple timekeeper. He was a vital sentinel, using the very instrument of order to orchestrate acts of beautiful subversion. By making slight, almost imperceptible alterations to the established patterns of peals, he could send urgent messages across an entire abbey or convent without a single soul outside the order suspecting a thing. The system's power lay in its deep knowledge of routine. Every member of a monastic community knew the precise sound of the bell calling them to matins at dawn or to compline at night. Any deviation from that deeply ingrained rhythm would be instantly noticeable to the initiated ear, while sounding like nothing more than a slight irregularity to any outside visitor or inspecting official. A call to prayer that arrived 5 minutes early might not be a mistake at all, but a coded alert that unauthorized visitors had arrived on the grounds, giving scholars in the library precious moments to hide contraband texts. The most dramatic signals involved the number of rings. The standard toll for a funeral might be a slow, solemn sequence of 8 bells. If the bell ringer suddenly delivered 9, it could be a covert signal that the body being buried was not that of a fellow monk, but a chest of forbidden books being interred in the sacred ground, safe from the prying eyes of any future inspection. This auditory code required immense precision and trust. The bell ringer had to be a master of his craft, capable of executing the official peals with perfect fidelity, while simultaneously holding the secret rhythms and sequences in his mind, ready to deploy them at a moment's notice. The messages could be incredibly specific. A rapid, staccato series of 3 rings followed by 2 slow, drawn-out tones might instruct certain members to gather in the scriptorium, while a single, unexpectedly loud strike in the middle of the afternoon could be a general alarm, sending everyone to their predetermined posts to enact a well-rehearsed plan of concealment. This transformed the entire abbey into a single, responsive organism, its nervous system wired directly to the bell tower. Historical evidence from monastic chronicles provides captivating proof of this practice. In one account from a French abbey, a visiting bishop known for his harsh crackdowns on theological dissent was scheduled for a surprise inspection. As his retinue approached the main gate, the watchman in the tower did not cry out. He simply rang the bell for vespers a full half-hour early. To the bishop, it seemed the monastery was merely devout and eager to pray. But to every monk within earshot, the premature ringing was a code red alert. By the time the bishop's party entered the courtyard, the abbey appeared serene and orderly, all evidence of controversial translation work or scientific inquiry having vanished into hidden compartments and behind false walls. The bell, the literal voice of ecclesiastical authority, had been used to protect the very knowledge that authority sought to suppress. A perfect and poetic act of silent defiance that resonated through the stone corridors long after the sound had faded. Beyond the stone walls and echoing halls, the monastery garden was a sanctuary of quiet order and divine contemplation, a place where monks nurtured both their souls and their sustenance. But for those safeguarding forbidden knowledge, these carefully tended plots of earth held a deeper purpose. They became a living, breathing message board, a silent signaling system cultivated right under the watchful eyes of authority. The very act of gardening, a fundamental monastic duty, provided the perfect cover for a covert language written not on parchment, but with petals, leaves, and the rich soil itself. This method was perhaps one of the most elegantly disguised of all, transforming the peaceful work of cultivation into a dynamic tool for survival. The language of the garden was one of subtle patterns and intentional pairings, a code known only to the trusted few who tended the beds. A seemingly haphazard row of sage plants might not be a mistake at all, but a carefully placed signal that a recently arrived traveler was a trusted ally and that the guest house was safe for a secret meeting. Conversely, a patch of deliberately wilted lavender, perhaps caused by a discreet pour of salt water at the roots, could serve as a silent alarm, warning everyone that the abbot was conducting an unexpected inspection of the grounds and that any illicit activities must cease immediately. The beauty of this system was its complete integration into the rhythm of monastic life. An outsider, even a suspicious official, would see nothing but monks quietly going about their holy work, weeding and watering. They would never suspect that the placement of a rosemary bush or the health of a thyme plant was part of a sophisticated communication network. This botanical code extended to guiding movement across the grounds themselves. A path lined with specific herbs on one side could silently direct a fugitive scholar to a hidden entrance concealed behind a wall of ivy. The presence of a rare, non-native flower in a particular quadrant of the medicinal garden might indicate that a new shipment of contraband texts had arrived and was waiting to be unpacked in the herbarium. The gardeners themselves were the key operators in this system, their daily rounds a constant process of sending and receiving vital information. As they pruned, planted, and harvested, they were also updating the status of the entire operation, their actions speaking a silent volume about the security of their sacred and secret mission. Historical evidence for this practice is scattered like seeds through botanical texts and personal monastic diaries. In one fascinating account, a monk describes being instructed by his superior to ensure the marjoram flourishes near the eastern wall, a task he initially took as simple horticultural advice. It was only later he learned that vigorous marjoram in that location was a signal to a sympathetic local farmer that it was safe to leave supplies in a hollowed-out tree at the property's edge. Another diary from a German abbey details how, during a period of intense scrutiny, the monks allowed a particularly aggressive weed to overtake a section of the vegetable garden. To any inspecting bishop, it was a sign of slothful neglect, but to the monastic community, it was a clear message that all covert scholarly work was to be suspended until the garden was weeded, a euphemism for the danger passing. The monastery garden, a symbol of peace and providence, thus concealed a world of silent urgency, where the growth of a plant could mean the difference between safety and discovery, and where every flowerbed held a meaning known only to those who had helped plant it. Now consider the humble bakery, a place of warmth and sustenance, where the comforting smell of fresh bread drew everyone from the poorest laborer to the wealthiest merchant. In the heart of the medieval town, the bakery was far more than just a shop. It was a central hub of daily life, a place where news was exchanged and communities connected. It was within this bustling, flower-dusted environment that bakers, often respected and well-connected members of their guilds, found a unique way to serve a far more secretive purpose. Using the very loaves they baked, they developed a silent language of scoring, a system of cuts made into the dough before baking that could warn, guide, and protect those in the know, all under the welcoming guise of their daily trade. The process was deceptively simple yet required immense precision. Before a loaf was slid into the roaring heat of the oven, a baker would use a sharp blade, known as a lame, to score its top. For most, this was a practical necessity, allowing steam to escape and giving the bread its characteristic appearance. But for a baker working with a secret network, each slash and curve was a carefully chosen symbol. A long, single slash down the center of a round boule might simply mean the bread was made with rye flour. But if that same baker added two shorter, perpendicular cuts at the top, forming a subtle cross, it could be a dire warning to the intended recipient. Do not approach me, danger is near. Conversely, a circular score around the base of a loaf could silently signal that a planned meeting was still on and the designated location was secure. The message was baked right in, immutable and ready for delivery. This culinary code was brilliantly effective for several reasons. First, it was incredibly public yet utterly discreet. A loaf of bread with a specific pattern could be placed in the shop window, visible to anyone passing by. An ally would know to come in and purchase that specific loaf, while a city guard would see nothing but bread for sale. Second, it allowed for rapid dissemination of information. A single batch of scored loaves could convey the same urgent message to dozens of people across a city as they were purchased and taken into different homes. And third, it offered perfect deniability. If ever questioned about the unusual patterns, a baker could simply shrug and attribute it to regional tradition, a personal signature style, or even a superstitious practice for ensuring a good rise. The evidence, after all, was meant to be consumed, vanishing without a trace once its message had been received. Medieval guild records and the occasional surviving cookbook offer us tantalizing fragments of evidence for this practice. In the archives of a baker's guild in southern France, there is a curious entry that mentions a master baker being fined not for poor quality, but for persistent and peculiar marking of his wares contrary to customary form. The official reason given was deception of the customer, but many historians believe the real offense was his suspected use of bread to coordinate with local dissident groups. Furthermore, some of the earliest known illustrated cookbooks show loaves with scoring patterns that seem to have no practical baking benefit: intricate spirals, grid-like patterns, and precise symbols suggesting they may have served a communicative purpose far beyond the culinary. In this way, the simple, life-giving act of baking bread became a powerful act of silent resistance, ensuring that a community could be nourished by both food and crucial information, all from the same source. While the grand gestures of cloak folds and architectural signals operated on a larger scale, some of the most effective communication happened at ground level, quite literally at the feet of the knowledge carriers. In an environment where a misplaced glance could mean capture, the need for hyper-personal, instantly adjustable signals was paramount. This is where the humble shoelace, a feature of common footwear like turnshoes and ankle boots, entered the clandestine stage. It was a tool of beautiful simplicity, always present, easily modified, and almost never remarked upon. A person's shoes were the last thing most people would scrutinize, making them the perfect canvas for a silent, dynamic language of knots and loops. The system was one of deliberate imperfection and nuanced variation. In a society where keeping one's dress neat and orderly was a sign of respectability, a flaw in one's presentation was noticeable. A knowledge carrier could use this to their advantage. Imagine a scholar waiting in a crowded town square, hoping to make contact with a fellow agent. He might casually lean against a wall and glance down, noticing the other man's shoes. If the laces were tied in a simple, single knot, it was the all-clear signal. But if they were fastened with an unusual double knot, or worse, left completely untied and trailing in the mud, the message was clear: abort the mission, the meeting is compromised. The very act of having untied laces, which to any observer would suggest mere carelessness or haste, was in fact a brilliantly calculated warning, a signal that could be enacted in a split second if danger suddenly appeared. This method offered unparalleled flexibility for the traveler on the move. Unlike a window shutter that was fixed in place or a loaf of bread that was baked with a permanent message, a shoelace knot could be changed moment to moment, adapting to the fluidity of a dangerous journey. A messenger being followed could quickly duck into an alley and, under the pretense of adjusting his boot, re-tie his laces into a complex pattern that meant "I have a tale, do not approach." Conversely, upon reaching a safe house, he could loosen them completely, signaling to the lookout inside that he had arrived alone and unobserved. This allowed for real-time status updates without any need to stop, speak, or even make eye contact with another person. The entire conversation happened in the dust of the road, a silent dialogue written in leather thongs and simple knots. Evidence of this practice surfaces in some of the most pragmatic medieval texts, travel guides, and early manuals on espionage intended for diplomats and merchants operating in hostile territories. These manuals often contain chapters on unremarkable signals, and the detailing of shoelace codes is frequently mentioned. They advised travelers to agree upon a simple system with their companions before embarking, turning a mundane part of their dress into a vital tool for group coordination. In one account, a group of merchants fleeing a region under interdiction used their lace patterns to maintain a single-file order in a dense forest at night. The man at the front would signal changes in direction or warnings of obstacles simply by tapping his foot in a way that altered the drape of his laces, a silent guide for the man walking behind him. It was a powerful reminder that in the world of silent signals, sometimes the most powerful messages were not delivered from on high, but were quite literally tied to the earth, each step a potential sentence in a hidden language of survival. Within the quiet confines of the scriptorium, where the air was thick with the scent of ink and parchment, the scribe's most essential tool, the feather quill, became an instrument of silent intrigue. To the untrained eye, the selection of a quill was a matter of mere preference or availability, a simple choice before the labor of writing began. But for those enmeshed in the dangerous work of preserving forbidden knowledge, this everyday act was laden with hidden significance. The type of feather, its preparation, and even its placement on the writing desk formed a sophisticated code, allowing scribes to communicate their status and the nature of their work without ever breaking the sacred silence of their hall. The language of quills was one of subtlety and specificity, often beginning with the choice of bird. A large, sturdy primary feather from a goose was the standard tool for copying common texts, its broad nib and reliable flow making it ideal for hours of meticulous work. Within a secret network, however, the goose quill could take on a coded meaning. A scribe selecting a goose quill from a pot might simply be indicating that the text they were about to transcribe was benign, perhaps a approved religious tract, and that no special precautions were needed. But the arrival of a more unusual quill sent a very different signal. A raven's feather, with its darker hue and sharper point, could be a prearranged sign of urgency or danger. Its selection might warn others in the room that the text being copied was highly sensitive, that the scribe felt uneasy, or even that an inspection was imminent. The very act of choosing the darker quill was a silent alarm, prompting allies to be extra vigilant. This system extended far beyond the mere selection of the feather. The way a scribe prepared the quill, a process known as trimming the nib, could add another layer of meaning. The standard cut was a clean, angled slit to hold ink. But a scribe might deliberately trim the nib in an unusual way, perhaps cutting a small notch into one side or leaving the tip slightly frayed. To an observer, this would look like a simple imperfection, the work of a less skilled hand. But to an initiated fellow scribe, that distinctive trim could indicate that the document being written contained a hidden message within its text, or that the scribe themselves was operating under duress. Even the way the quill was handled spoke volumes. A scribe holding their quill with a tight, clenched grip might signal stress or alert others to a perceived threat in the room. Casually laying the quill diagonally across the inkwell instead of parallel to the desk's edge could be a silent question. Is the coast clear? the answer might come from across the room as another scribe subtly nodded or adjusted their own spectacles. The sheer genius of this method was its complete integration into the scribe's natural workflow. Every motion, from dipping the quill in ink to pausing to sharpen its point, could be part of the performance. There were no suspicious pauses or furtive glances. The entire conversation happened in the open, disguised as the very act of writing itself. Historical support for this practice is found in the meticulous records of medieval stationers and artisans who supplied writing materials to monasteries and universities. Their logs sometimes note unusual orders, such as a specific request for a bundle of crow quills from a client who had previously only used goose, hinting at a change in need that went beyond mere writing preference. Furthermore, analysis of certain manuscripts has revealed inconsistencies in the nib marks on a single page, suggesting that a scribe may have switched quills midway through a line, not because one broke, but to subtly alter the message they were embedding in the work. In this high-stakes environment, the feather quill was far more than a writing implement. It was a sentinel, its silent presence on the parchment, a constant guardian of the dangerous truths it was tasked to record. Amidst the raucous, ale-soaked atmosphere of a medieval tavern, where laughter, gossip, and the clatter of tankards filled the air, another, far quieter conversation was taking place. In these crowded public houses, where every stranger could be a friend or a spy, overt communication was impossible. This challenge gave rise to one of the most socially camouflaged signaling systems of all, the silent language of mug placement. A knowledge carrier couldn't risk a whispered conversation in a shadowy corner, but they could arrange their drinking vessel on a worn wooden table in a way that broadcast a clear message to any watching ally, all while appearing to be simply enjoying a well-earned drink after a long day's travel. The system's brilliance was its elegant simplicity and its flawless deniability. A group might agree that a tankard placed with its handle pointing directly toward the tavern door indicated that the exit was clear and unguarded, a silent green light for a swift and safe departure. Conversely, if a mug was deliberately overturned, its open mouth facing down on the table, it could be a dire warning that the authorities had arrived or that the meeting had been compromised, an urgent command to abort all plans and disperse immediately. The positioning was everything. A mug set slightly apart from others might signal that the carrier was alone and waiting for contact, while a cluster of mugs arranged in a tight circle could indicate that a full council was in session and should not be interrupted. These gestures took advantage of the chaotic, fluid nature of tavern life, where objects were constantly being moved, lifted, and set down, making any single arrangement seem like a matter of random chance rather than deliberate intent. This method allowed for dynamic, real-time communication across a crowded room without a single nod or glance that might be intercepted. A scholar waiting for a contact could simply adjust his mug as a new patron entered the establishment, instantly updating his status. A lookout seated near the entrance could signal the approach of the town guard by casually spinning his own tankard, a motion that looked like idle fidgeting but would trigger a chain reaction of subtle adjustments down the long table as the warning was silently passed. The tavern keeper, often a sympathetic member of the network, could participate too, perhaps by serving a particular patron with a mug that was already positioned in a specific way, a silent confirmation that a message had been received or that a safe house was ready. Literary sources from the period, such as Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales, offer us tantalizing glimpses into this world of coded pub behavior. While not explicitly detailing the signals, Chaucer's vivid descriptions of tavern life are filled with moments where characters communicate volumes through seemingly insignificant actions. A raised cup, a turned head, a particular seat chosen at a table. Medieval tavern keepers' account books sometimes hint at this practice indirectly, noting strange patterns like certain patrons consistently running up large tabs for groups that never seemed to be present, suggesting that the bought ale was a cover for the real transaction, the exchange of silent information. In the warm, noisy heart of the medieval public house, a simple ceramic mug became a powerful tool of discretion, its silent placement ensuring that the most important discussions could happen in the most open of places, hidden in the plain sight of clattering camaraderie. Pilgrimage in the Middle Ages was more than a spiritual journey. It was a massive, mobile phenomenon that provided the perfect cover for a different kind of quest. Among the throngs of devout travelers shuffling along well-worn routes to Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, or Rome, moved another type of pilgrim, the knowledge carrier. These individuals seized upon the universal respect for pilgrims and the ubiquitous symbols of their journeys to create a silent identification system hiding in the most sacred of plain sights. The humble pilgrim badge, a mass-produced token sold at shrine sites, was typically worn as a public declaration of faith and a souvenir. But in the hands of a covert operative, this piece of cheap lead tin alloy was transformed into a sophisticated badge of trust, a tiny metal key that could unlock safe passage and identify allies across a crowded marketplace or a dangerous mountain pass. The system's power lay in its manipulation of devout expectation. To most people, a pilgrim was a figure of piety above suspicion, and their badges were simply proof of a completed journey. This granted knowledge carriers a powerful form of social camouflage. Their signaling methods were as varied as the badges themselves. A network might designate a specific, less common badge, like one depicting the keys of St. Peter from Rome instead of the more popular scallop shell of Santiago, as a marker for trusted members. Simply spotting that particular badge on a traveler's hat or cloak was enough to initiate silent contact. But the real genius was in the manner of display. Wearing a badge in the conventional way, pinned neatly to the front of one's tunic, might signal that all was well. However, pinning that same badge upside down could be a stark, silent alarm indicating the carrier was being followed or that the next safe house was compromised. Another common tactic involved wearing the badge on the non-dominant side. A badge typically pinned on the right shoulder moved to the left could silently tell a watching ally that the carrier was transporting sensitive materials and needed an escort. This method offered incredible flexibility and deniability. If ever challenged by authorities, a carrier could instantly revert the badge to its proper placement with a simple, fumbling adjustment, blaming the error on the rigors of the road or a loose pin. The very act of pilgrimage provided a ready-made excuse for being on the move, for carrying a pack, and for seeking shelter in strange places. A group of scholars transporting forbidden texts could travel hundreds of miles under the perfect guise of devout pilgrims, their true mission concealed behind a veil of prayed rosaries and publicly displayed piety. Their badges did not just represent a journey to a holy site, they marked a far more dangerous pilgrimage, the journey of an idea from persecution to preservation. Historical records from church decrees and the logs of shrine custodians provide fascinating, if frustrated, evidence of this practice. Church authorities occasionally issued edicts condemning the irreverent or improper display of pilgrim signs, not fully understanding the covert communications they were unintentionally trying to suppress. In one account from the chronicles of a monastery along the route to Canterbury, the abbot complains of certain false pilgrims who wore their badges in a manner most peculiar and who seemed more interested in quiet conversations with specific townsfolk than in receiving the shrine's blessings. What the abbot likely witnessed was a sophisticated exchange between a knowledge carrier and a local safe house operator, coordinated entirely through the silent language of lead and tin. The Pilgrim badge, a symbol of public faith, thus became a powerful tool for private trust, ensuring that the most dangerous journeys could be made under the safest and most unsuspecting of disguises. Leaving the crowded taverns and pilgrim roads behind, we venture now into the quieter, more isolated landscapes of the medieval countryside. Here, in rural hamlets and along lonely forest tracks, knowledge carriers faced a different set of challenges. Without the constant bustle of urban life to hide within, they relied on the very landscape itself to communicate, and few things were more fundamental to rural domestic life than firewood. The careful stacking of logs outside a cottage, farmhouse, or remote inn was a universal sight, a necessary chore to ensure survival through the cold months. But for those in the know, these orderly piles were far more than just a store of fuel. They were a silent, stationary sentinel, a public bulletin board that could warn, welcome, or guide a passing ally with perfect discretion. The language of the woodpile was one of geometry and intention, a code built upon the expectation of normalcy. In any given village, there was a generally accepted, practical way to stack wood, often in neat, parallel rows to promote drying and stability. Any significant deviation from this norm would be instantly noticeable to a trained eye, yet easily dismissed by anyone else as a sign of haste, laziness, or simple eccentricity. A network operating in a particular region might decide that a stack with its logs crisscrossed in a haphazard, jumbled fashion was a glaring red flag. To a knowledge carrier approaching a suspected safe house, that chaotic pile was a silent scream to keep riding, to not even dismount, as the location had been compromised or was under surveillance. Conversely, a stack that was unusually perfect, with logs aligned with almost military precision, could be the green light, a clear signal that the home was secure, the coast was clear, and that it was safe to seek shelter or exchange information. This system was particularly vital for coordinating movements across large, sparsely populated areas. A scout riding ahead of a group carrying sensitive materials could adjust the woodpile at a designated waypoint in hours before the main party arrived. By the time the scholars or messengers got there, the message was already waiting for them, immutable and clear, having been posted without the scout ever needing to interact with another soul or risk leaving a paper trail. The method also allowed for more complex, layered messages. The height of the stack could indicate the number of people currently taking shelter inside, allowing a new arrival to assess if they would be overcrowding the space. The type of wood used in the top layer might even convey information about the nature of the threat: oak for local militia, pine for religious authorities, enabling those approaching to tailor their story and behavior accordingly. The sheer longevity of the signal was another of its great strengths. Unlike a candle flame that could be snuffed out or a mug that could be immediately moved, a rearranged woodpile was a message that could stand for days, patiently waiting to be read by the right person. This was crucial in an era of slow, unpredictable travel. A warning stacked by a fleeing scholar could remain effective for a week, ensuring that anyone following in their footsteps days later would still receive the critical alert to turn back. Folklore from rural regions across Europe is peppered with oblique references to this practice. Tales speak of fairy-touched woodpiles that rearrange themselves overnight to warn families of coming danger, or of wise old hermits whose seemingly sloppy chopping skills were actually a revered service, their disordered stacks guiding righteous fugitives to safety. These stories, passed down through generations, are likely the faded echo of a very real, very practical system of silent communication, where the simple, honest work of preparing for winter became intertwined with the urgent, secret work of ensuring that the light of knowledge would not be extinguished. For the medieval traveler, whether a merchant on a trade route or a scholar fleeing persecution, a map was more than just a guide, it was a lifeline. But in a world where the wrong path could lead to capture or death, these precious documents had to do more than just show the way. They had to tell a story only the intended reader could understand. This is where the art of the marginal note transformed from a simple annotation into a sophisticated silent language. Knowledge carriers, often working with cartographers who were sympathetic to their cause, developed a system of tiny, seemingly accidental marks that could turn a standard map into a coded guide for survival. These weren't the large, decorative illustrations of sea monsters or wind heads that adorned public maps. These were subtle, discreet symbols, easily overlooked by a casual observer, but bursting with meaning for someone who knew the key. The symbols themselves were a study in purposeful ambiguity. A small, carefully drawn star in the margin next to a mountain pass might not indicate a celestial body at all, but rather signal that the path was monitored by friendly sentries and was therefore safe for travel. Conversely, a minute cross or a tiny blotch of darker ink near a river ford could be a dire warning that the crossing was frequently patrolled by hostile forces or that the bridge was compromised. The genius of this system was its layered deniability. If a map were inspected by authorities, the carrier could simply claim the star was an idle doodle or a personal mark of appreciation for a beautiful landscape. The cross could be explained away as a pious reflection, a prayer for safe passage scrawled in the moment. The true meaning existed only in the shared understanding between the map's creator and its intended user, a secret pact inked onto parchment. This practice required immense skill from the cartographer, who had to be both a master geographer and a master of deception. Their notes and personal journals, what few have survived, offer tantalizing glimpses into this double life. We read of mapmakers deliberately altering the scale of certain regions to create blank spaces on the map where safe houses could be indicated with a tiny dot, a detail that would be meaningless without knowing the true scale. Others developed personalized ciphers where the number of lines in a drawing of a tree corresponded to the number of guards at a nearby checkpoint, or where the specific shading of a forest indicated whether it was safe to camp there or if it was a known ambush site. The map became a living document, its margins a continuous, silent conversation between the creator in the safety of his workshop and the carrier braving the dangers of the road. The value of this technique was proven in the most dramatic of circumstances: narrow escapes from pursuit. Explorer journals from the period describe harrowing chases through unfamiliar territory, where the only advantage was a map filled with these silent warnings. One account tells of a group of scholars fleeing a city, their only map marked with a series of faint dots along a secondary road. Following these dots, they were led not to a main highway, but to a series of secluded shepherds' huts and caves, allowing them to avoid the main patrols that were hunting for them. In another case, a merchant's map of a coastal region had several small, wave-like lines drawn near a particular inlet. To anyone else, it was an artistic flourish. To the merchant, it was a coded message from his cartographer cousin that this was a spot where goods and people could be smuggled ashore away from the official port authorities. The map margin, therefore, was far more than empty space. It was the most critical part of the document, a canvas for secrecy that turned the science of cartography into a vital art of clandestine communication. Imagine the sound of a simple, cheerful whistle cutting through the air of a bustling medieval market or echoing down a quiet monastery corridor. To anyone else, it was just a fragment of a popular tune, a sign of someone in good spirits or perhaps merely passing the time. But for the knowledge carrier, that brief musical phrase was anything but casual. It was a precise, prearranged signal, a burst of coded information sent on the wind, capable of saving lives without a single word being spoken. This was the power of the whistle tune fragment, a method that turned an ordinary human sound into an extraordinary tool for clandestine communication, leveraging the most fleeting and untraceable of mediums, music itself. The system's genius was rooted in its brilliant use of auditory camouflage. In the soundscape of daily medieval life, whistling was as common as birdsong. Laborers whistled while they worked, travelers whistled on the road to ward off loneliness, and children whistled tunes they'd learned in the town square. This universality provided the perfect cover. A carrier could whistle a specific sequence of notes, perhaps the opening bars of a well-known harvest song or a distinctive rhythm from a regional dance, while seemingly engrossed in chopping wood or tending to a garden. To any observing guard or suspicious official, it was just harmless background noise, but to an ally within earshot, that particular fragment was a crystal-clear message. A rising three-note pattern might mean proceed as planned, while a descending two-note sigh could translate to an urgent danger, disperse immediately. The message was sent and received in a matter of seconds, its meaning vanishing as quickly as the sound waves themselves, leaving no physical evidence behind. This technique offered an incredible advantage for real-time, mobile coordination, especially in situations where visual signals were impossible. Consider a scout walking ahead of a group transporting forbidden texts through a dense forest. If he rounded a bend and spotted an armed patrol ahead, he couldn't risk turning back or making a gesture that might be seen. But he could simply keep walking, put his hands in his pockets, and begin whistling a specific, mournful tune fragment that meant, ambush ahead, take the hidden path to the south. The scholars behind him, hearing the familiar melody, would understand the warning instantly. They could then casually veer onto a different trail, their change in direction appearing perfectly natural to anyone watching. The scout, meanwhile, could continue whistling as he walked right past the patrol, his innocent demeanor completely disarming any suspicion. The sound itself became a shield, allowing warnings to be delivered from within the very heart of the danger zone. The choice of tune was a critical part of the cipher, often drawing from a deep well of local culture to enhance its secrecy. A network operating in a specific village might use a fragment from a folk song unique to that region, a melody that would be meaningless to an outsider from another province or country. A monastic order might use a distinctive phrase from a Gregorian chant known only to their members. This localization made the signals virtually impossible for a foreign inquisitor or a central authority to crack. They could interrogate a suspect for days and never think to ask about the tunes he whistled while working, as the concept itself would be entirely outside their frame of reference. The signals lived in the oral tradition, passed down not through incriminating documents, but through whispered instruction and practiced repetition, making them one of the most secure and resilient methods of all. Evidence for this captivating practice is by its very nature elusive, as it left no written records behind. Its history is preserved in the faint echoes of oral traditions and the occasional frustrated commentary from authorities. Some medieval musical treatises, for instance, briefly complain of certain melodies being corrupted or misused in various regions, hints that perhaps these tunes were being employed for purposes other than simple entertainment. More compelling are the folk tales that have trickled down through the centuries. There are stories from the French countryside of whistling woods, where certain tunes would guide lost travelers to safety, and legends in the Scottish Highlands of rebels using specific bird-like calls to coordinate movements against English patrols. These stories, while romanticized, are likely the cultural memory of a very real and practical survival tactic. The whistle tune fragment represents the pinnacle of silent signaling, a message made of nothing but air and memory, a secret that was heard by all but understood by only a few, ensuring that the most urgent of warnings could travel on the very breath of the person who carried it. What these 21 silent signals reveal is far more than a collection of clever historical tricks. They represent a timeless testament to the human spirit's refusal to be silenced. Each folded cloak, each strategically placed bookmark, was a quiet act of defiance, a declaration that the pursuit of knowledge and truth would not be so easily extinguished by fear or force. The medieval knowledge carriers, from the scribe in his scriptorium to the pilgrim on a dusty road, understood a fundamental principle that still resonates deeply today. True power often lies not in loud proclamations, but in the subtle, the nuanced, and the discreet. Their legacy is one of incredible ingenuity, born from necessity, showing us that when we are truly dedicated to a cause, we will find astonishingly creative ways to connect, to warn, and to preserve what matters most. This hidden history also offers us a powerful lesson in the architecture of trust. These signals only worked within a web of absolute confidence and shared understanding. A misplaced handkerchief knot or an incorrectly tapped walking stick could lead to disaster, meaning every gesture was underpinned by a profound reliance on one another. In our modern world, where digital communication can feel both omnipresent and oddly impersonal, this reminds us of the irreplaceable value of building genuine, trusted networks. It challenges us to consider who we rely on and how we build those circles of confidence, whether we're protecting a sensitive project, supporting a friend in need, or simply navigating the complexities of daily life. The medieval networks teach us that the strongest communities are often those connected by invisible threads of mutual understanding and unspoken loyalty. So, how do these ancient tactics translate to our contemporary lives? The parallels are both fascinating and immediately practical. Consider the digital realm. The use of encrypted messaging apps, complex passwords, and privacy settings are our modern equivalents of the ink stain code and the window shutter alignment, subtle layers of protection designed to shield our information from unwanted eyes. On a more personal level, think about the non-verbal cues we use every day. A slight shake of the head from a friend across a crowded room, a specific emoji used in a group chat to signal inside jokes or serious concern, or even the deliberate placement of a coffee mug on your desk to indicate you're in deep focus and shouldn't be disturbed. These are our own silent signals, the modern descendants of the medieval whistle tune and the coin flip, allowing us to communicate complex messages with elegant simplicity. Ultimately, the story of these silent signals is a celebration of quiet resilience. It encourages us to pay closer attention, to listen for the messages that aren't being shouted, and to appreciate the profound strength that can be found in subtlety. In an era that often values volume over substance and haste over deliberation, there is immense power in choosing our words and actions with care, in communicating with purpose and precision. The next time you find yourself in a challenging situation, remember the medieval knowledge carriers. Ask yourself not just what you can say, but how you can signal. How can you build trust through action rather than promise? How can you protect what's important with discretion and cleverness? The past has handed us a powerful toolkit, not of weapons but of whispers. It is now our turn to decide how we will use them to shape a wiser, more connected future. The ingenious methods of medieval knowledge carriers are not merely relics of a distant past. They are the direct ancestors of the communication tools we use every day in our modern world. Consider the digital landscape we now navigate. The complex encryption that secures our text messages and online transactions operates on the very same principle as the coded bookmark placement or the ink stain in a manuscript. It is a layer of hidden meaning, designed to be understood only by the intended recipient while appearing as meaningless noise to any outside observer. Our sophisticated social media privacy settings are the direct descendants of the window shutter alignment and the Pilgrim's badge. They are deliberate, public-facing configurations that silently signal who is allowed into our inner circle and who is kept at a distance. Even the simple act of setting your status to "away" or "do not disturb" on a messaging platform is a modern cloak fold, a silent gesture that broadcasts your availability without uttering a single word. This historical connection extends far beyond our screens and into our daily interpersonal interactions. The non-verbal cues we rely on in a team meeting, a subtle nod of agreement, a slight shake of the head to signal dissent, or even the specific way we arrange our notebooks on a conference table, are our own versions of the Tavern mug placement or the shoelace knot. They form a sophisticated, silent language that allows a group to coordinate, support, and protect a shared purpose with remarkable efficiency, often without disrupting the flow of spoken conversation. A firefighter entering a burning building uses hand signals that are every bit as precise and life-saving as the walking stick tap sequences used to navigate dangerous medieval roads. In this way, the ancient art of silent communication has not vanished. It has evolved, seamlessly integrating into the most advanced and mundane aspects of our contemporary lives. However, with this powerful toolkit of subtlety and discretion comes a profound ethical responsibility that our medieval predecessors understood all too well. Their signals were designed for protection and preservation in the face of genuine oppression, a moral imperative to safeguard truth from those who would destroy it. Today, we must be equally vigilant about the intentions behind our own silent languages. The same principles that allow a team to collaborate seamlessly can also be co-opted to exclude, manipulate, or bully within a workplace or social group. A glance between two people that signals a private joke can build camaraderie, but that same glance used to mock a third party becomes a weapon of deception and cruelty. The ethical line is drawn at the purpose. Are these signals being used to build trust and protect value, or to erode trust and create hidden hierarchies of harm? Therefore, the greatest lesson we can take from these historical tactics is not just how to be discreet, but how to be wisely and ethically discreet. It is a call to conscious communication. We can draw immense inspiration from the medieval carriers to enhance our own personal security using strong, unique passwords as our modern coin flip identifiers, being mindful of what we share online as carefully as a scribe chose their quill. We can apply their principles to foster more thoughtful and efficient teamwork, learning to read the room and contribute to a positive, unspoken collaborative energy. But we must always wield this power within firm legal and moral boundaries, ensuring our silent signals are forces for good, transparency, and inclusion, rather than instruments of deception, exclusion, or malice. The timeless value of this hidden history is its invitation to carry knowledge forward, not just factual knowledge, but the deeper wisdom of how to share it, protect it, and connect over it with care, integrity, and a profound respect for the silent spaces between